We all know Condi Thief is strong in PvP, but in World vs. World it's a little bit different because there's a lot of reveals and there's large scale situations where Condi Thief doesn't scale up but a Power Thief does, and it's really hard for you to get out of a situation that you're outnumbered as a Condi Thief, whereas a Power Thief it's really simple because you have more mobility and you can't really fight around sentries as a Shadow Arts kind of like perma-stealth thief. So the archetype that's viable in PvP isn't really viable in World vs. World. So I created this Condi Thief build to allow you to not only play around reveals, because we know Sikkim Rangers are very common in World vs. World, and if you're running the variant of Condi Thief where you take the Hidden Thief and the Hide in Shadows and Shadow's Refuge for like the perma-stealth gameplay, then you're going to get hard countered by reveal and just enemies who know how to play around it, right? So this is more of a trickster style of a Condi Thief, and what that does is it not only gives you a lot more Condi cleanse because you can take the Shadow's Embrace, but you can also take Trickster. And compared to a Hidden Thief, which you would take Hide in Shadows, that gives you one Condi cleanse, and then you'd have to take Signet, which you don't really want on this build, and then that's pretty much it. So you only have one Condi cleanse on like another kind of variant of this build. So this one has way more Condi cleanse because it has Shadow's Embrace and Trickster, which give you tons of small Condi cleanses here and there, and then they scale up and kind of like double up with the Antitoxin rune. So let's go over the idea of the build and then we'll talk about how it's applied. So in Deadly Arts, there is another kind of topic that I want to go over, and that's potent poison versus improvisation. Improvisation gives you double the stolen abilities, so when you steal to a target, based on which class you steal to, you will get a skill as your F2, and you can use it twice with improv. And it'll also recharge one of your random equipped utility skills whenever you land steal, which is basically these three abilities. So it gives you a lot of sustain because your utility skills are basically sustain and ports, so it gives you a lot more mobility and playmaking, and that's why I like improvisation. Whereas potent poison, you feel a lot slower, and all it really does is increase your poison damage, and while it does increase it a lot, you don't really have only poison as your damage, right? So the damage increase of poison is 20%, and then it gives you an additional stack on your traits, but you're really not taking Panic Strike, so it's only really increasing your poison on Serpent's Touch and Deadly Ambition. And Deadly Ambition actually gets a lot of bonus from potent poison because you can proc it quite often with Shadow Strike, and it increases the damage of Deadly Ambition from like 500-ish to like 1,200, as you can see. If I could show you, this is an inspect. So basically, Deadly Ambition does get a very big increase from potent poison, but just the Condi damage you get from Deadly Ambition is good enough. If you really wanted to, you could take Mug for more sustain, but you're not really taking any power on this build, so it's going to do no damage. So yeah, I like Deadly Ambition. This is a Trailblazer build, so you're all Condi damage. You just want Condi damage on this build. So whenever you steal, you will basically give 2 poison to the target for like 14 seconds. It's pretty long, and whenever you poison a target, you will also put weakness on them, and because you have Condi duration, the weakness is actually longer, so it's normally like 3 seconds of weakness. Well, now it's 4 and like a quarter there. So weakness is really good because it counters power builds, so you have a lot of defense against power builds just by putting on poison. You have lots of ways to put on poison, right? From Deadly Ambition, which is whenever you use your Shadow Strike, you'll hit. And You'll give poison from also the Shadow Arts trait, Leeching Venoms, and whenever you steal. So you have lots of ways to give out weakness. It's on a 10-second ICD, so it's not permanent, but it's good. And also, I take Even the Odds. Even the Odds gives vulnerability whenever you steal, and 5 might whenever you land a sneak attack. And your sneak attack is mainly going to be, well, sneak attack. So, a stealth attack, that's what they're called. And the might gives you 150 condition damage, and you're going to be pretty much using your sneak attack for damage anyways. So getting the might after it is good because then you have the might and then the condis are ticking from your sneak attack. So it's really nice for this type of build. The vulnerability whenever you steal is also nice because it gives you a cover condi. So you don't want people to cleanse your burst damage from your conditions. And while it does, yeah, it is nice to just add damage to your condition damage, which vulnerability does. It's mainly just for covering the condis. So whenever you burst them, you have like a ton of condis on there. So they have to do like a full cleanse if they're going to want to remove all of your condis. Panic Strike, not really that good because you don't really have Immobilize on this build other than on the Pistol 2, which while, yeah, the Immobilize is pretty long on this skill, it's not really worth it because the auto attack actually would do more damage, and it's 4 initiative each time you do that. So even if you had potent poison, it would be just better to use your 3 skill for damage. And obviously someone can't dodge when they're immobilized, but it's really not good enough because it's not like a team play build. This is a solo build. So you don't really get that much benefit from just immobilizing people. So yeah, that's pretty much it. You also deal increased damage, but you don't really deal any damage. You're just condi damage. So that's kind of an irrelevant trait. And yeah, the improv is really good because you have a lot of playmaking potential, as I said, with getting your utilities off cooldown, but it allows you to be sort of aggressive with the build, which is sort of like the purpose of this variant of the build, because the original Condi Thief build that everyone usually plays is very passive and it's not fun, not interactive. This one is a lot more interactive and a lot more skill requiring, and it has a higher skill cap to it because you have so much playability. So I like improv a lot, even though it lowers your damage. It increases the ability for you to survive, first of all, but also you can play more aggressive, and we'll talk about how Infiltrator's Signet allows that. But whenever you use your cooldowns liberally, you have more chance of getting them back with improvisation. So it kind of rewards you for not only landing your steal, but also of using your skills and getting something out of them and then getting them back and being able to use them again. So in a way, it's kind of spammy, but also you get the stolen ability twice, right? Which can be really good versus Mesmers. You get the double glob versus other thieves, which is one of the main counters to this build. You'll get 2 stealth, kind of like feather abilities. So it gives you more stealth and more abilities to go into to use your, first of all, to peel for yourself, but also to do damage with your sneak attack. So you can use it once and then use your sneak attack, wait again, use the stealth attack, and you can get it again. So it just kind of helps you to fill in the gap between your steal burst, because that's where most of the damage comes from a Condi Thief build, is steal combined with some sort of like shadow strike or the sneak attack. But when you get stolen abilities that you can use twice, it helps you to fill the gap, peel it for yourself, or lock your target down in the interim. So I really like improvisation, just such a good trait. Next is trickery. So stealing gives you 2 initiative, and you also have 3 higher maximum initiative pool, which is just really good for making you, the playstyle of the build, right, is very bursty. So you go in, you try to play as aggressively as possible. If you get the kill, you go for the stomp, and then you get out and pool your energy again. So having a higher energy pool or initiative pool is just really important for the burst playstyle of Thief. And you also take Thrill of the Crime, which gives you Fury, which is not important at all, and Swiftness and Might. So Swiftness is really important because there is no movement speed on this build. The only way you get around is using Stealth, which will give you a increased movement speed, porting, and whenever Steel gives you Swiftness. So your Steel has a 25-second cooldown, so it's not at all a very good uptime on Swiftness. So you can feel slow if you can't manage your cooldowns very well. And then obviously a little bit more Might when you Steel, which is 90 condition damage. So it just adds a little bit more damage to your burst. And then Trickster is really important to this build because you have 3 tricks: your heal skill, Withdraw, which is a very powerful heal, and Roll for Initiative, and Dagger Storm. So all 3 of those tricks get a reduced recharge, and they cleanse a condition. So we'll talk about why the condition cleanse is important later. But basically, your heal skill being on a 20-second cooldown is super important because your heal skill not only gives you condition cleanse, but it also puts you in stealth because of Shadow Arts. And going into stealth is very good for your damage as well as your sustain, because it allows you to do your sneak attacks, which proc all of your traits. So yeah, Trickster is really important. It lowers the cooldown on Roll for Initiative as well, and both of these skills are evades. So that's sort of where you get your survivability instead of stealth. You use evades and stun breaks rather than just stealth. And you also have lead attacks, so you do 15% more damage and condition damage if you have 15 stacks of this. But basically for every stack of lead attacks you do 1% more damage, and you use a lot of initiative on this build, and every point of initiative you use gives you 1 stack of lead attacks. So it's just a nice, it's more for the burst, right? More burst damage. And finally you have Bewildering Ambush. Whenever you steal, you will confuse the target 6 stacks, which is quite a bit, and it's 4.25 seconds. So it starts out at 3, and then because you're using condition duration, it increases that duration. So that's just important for, once again, giving you that condi. First of all, it's a cover condi, even though you don't want them to cleanse it. It's just more unique conditions. So if they do want to cleanse it, then they're not cleansing maybe your poison or your bleed, and it's just more damage on your burst, right? So the timing of your steal, getting more conditions on it, is just always good. And in Shadow Arts, you'll be getting steal whenever you use your heal skill, as I said, and that's really important because the end of your withdraw can sometimes be a little bit vulnerable. So getting stealth afterwards is really nice. This saves you a lot of the time because after you use your heal skill, you kind of get like a burst in momentum, and then right after your heal skill's down, it's like, well, he's a free kill, right? He doesn't have his heal, he doesn't have his evade, right? So the stealth kind of allows you to reposition after you use your big kind of like escape skill, and it's a low cooldown, right? So more of this is happening because you have the Trickster. And then you have Shadow's Embrace, which whenever you go into stealth, you will remove one of the following conditions: burning, poison, bleeding, torment, and confusion. So basically all of the conditions that deal damage to you. And that's really good because those should be the priority of conditions, because you don't want to take damage always. Obviously cripple, weakness, and blind and stuff like that, those are important as well, but they're not like the highest priority. So this is a really strong trait because it does prioritize those conditions, but it only removes those conditions as well. So it's really important to have your Antitoxin rune, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So Meld with Shadows gives you longer stealth whenever it's granted by a thief skill. So a thief skill includes the stolen abilities from thieves, Cloak and Dagger. Your withdraw would originally give 1 second of stealth, so now it gives 2. but you can't really get this trait unless you're Shadow Arts, so it's basically originally 2. And that's pretty much it. If you get stealth from like blasting it, that's not considered a thief skill. So basically only Cloak and Dagger and your stolen ability from another thief really get a decent duration to it. But the reason why this is actually really good, even though you have low stealth application, is because Cloak and Dagger is the main way that you're gonna go for stealth stomps, and stomping takes around 4 seconds to cast. So you're not like vulnerable at the last second of your stomp animation, which means like people could interrupt you before you get the stomp off. So that extra second is really important on Cloak and Dagger because it ensures the stomp very, very securely. So next is, and also I need to talk about this. Meld with Shadows gives you 50% movement increase, so it makes up for your very slow build. So when you use Cloak and Dagger, you can kind of like reposition and kind of like use it as mobility. And 50% movement speed is pretty good. It's faster than swiftness, so yeah, it's really good. And then Leeching Venoms. So whenever you go in stealth, you will gain a stack of Spider Venom, and that will also, because this trait improves your Venoms, it will steal life from the target. It doesn't really do that much. Like it's 100 damage and 300 healing, but it's decent because it gives you an 8-second 1 stack of poison, which can do some pretty good damage over time. And in general, it's just more burst on your kind of like combos. So like you go into stealth, you get 1 stack of venom, and then it adds into your burst. So it's just more damage when you want it, and the other stuff isn't really that good. So Shadow Siphoning is kind of like the same idea. Whenever you use your stealth attack, you'll life siphon. So technically, whenever you use your sneak attack, you will steal like, because you'll always be in stealth when you use it, which means you gain at least 1 stack of Spider Venom. It maxes at 2, by the way. So if you're in stealth, it gives you 1 stack of that every 3 seconds, I think it is. Yeah, it's every 3 seconds, so it can give you basically 2 procs of that. So it's like maybe like 300 damage there, maybe 350, and then this is another 300, so it's like, you know, it's like 600 damage on your burst and just power damage, which is kind of okay. Yeah, I mean, you're not really getting any scaling there, but it gives you some nice healing and sustain, which is really important because you're not really getting much from anywhere else. It's just your heal skill and then your siphoning. So yeah, you want to be using your sneak attack as much as you can to get these healing. So finally is Rending Shade. This is another trait that scales with your sneak attacks. So whenever you use a stealth attack, it will steal a boon from the target, and if you are hitting a target that has no boons, it will fear targets in an AoE around you, not the target. So generally, if the target has no boons, you have to like melee range sneak attack them, because the range is actually 180 and the range of your sneak attack is 900. So you gotta kind of sacrifice a little bit of your positioning sometimes if you want the fear, but in reality, the fear isn't really that important. It's just the boon rip, because the boon rip on Rending Shade has a very high priority on protection and resistance. So protection obviously isn't that important for you to remove, maybe for your allies, but resistance is super important for you to remove, because obviously that's your main damage sources, conditions, and if they're going immune to conditions, well, that's not good. So Rending Shade is nice. It also steals the boon, so it gives you sustain. And oftentimes you'll steal swiftness from people, which can be really good because you have low swiftness uptime. So yeah, the boon rip on Rending Shade is really good. And also, one thing to mention is that Rending Shade steals the exact copy of that boon. So if they have a long swiftness duration, you now have perma swiftness. And if it's like a really like 1 second of resistance, yeah, you didn't really gain too much of it, but at least you remove that resistance. So it's just a good trait, and if you really wanted to, you could go with Cloaked in Shadow, which can give you more cover condis. So I wouldn't take Shadow Rejuvenation because you don't really need more initiative, and you're not in stealth that long anyways with this build. It's not the stealth version. But Cloaked in Shadow gives you blind whenever you go in stealth and AoE around you, and that can be really good because Cloak and Dagger is your main way of going into stealth, so that's a melee range ability, so you're often going to be in range to get the blind from Cloaked in Shadow, and that's another condi. So, for example, you go into you go into melee range, you Cloak and Dagger someone, and then that'll give vulnerability and blind, and then you'll use your sneak attack. That'll first of all give you leeching venoms, which is poison. Then it'll give you weakness, which comes from your poison. So that's 4 condis right there. And then you can use your sneak attack, and that's bleeding. That's 5 conditions right there already, just from using 2 skills from all of your traits. So yeah, it's really good. And yeah, it can add more cover condis just from this trait and a little bit more healing and damage. But in general, I think that the boon removal is better in World versus World. So you can choose which one you want. I choose Rending Shade. So let's move on over to the equipment. So I use full Trailblazer's gear. That gives you toughness, vitality, which are very survivable stats, and condition damage and expertise, which are pretty much all the damage that you need for a condi build. So yeah, Trailblazers is a very strong, and I say that very lightly when I say very strong, stat set. And for Condi Thief, it's just pretty much ideal. You can go for like a Rabid / Carrion setup where you get more condition damage and almost no condition duration, and that can be better in like burst situations versus squishies. But in general, I feel that the power burst that you get from having the crit chance and power from Carrion and Rabid is just not enough to really matter for losing a lot of your sustain and survivability. So if you do want to do that, and say you're playing in a non-solo situation and you want more damage, then yeah, you can go Rabid / Carrion mix, and that can allow you to run with a different sigil, which can give you like Torment Sigil, which would give you Torment on crit. But since this build has basically no crit, you have like 5% crit and then Fury, so it's going to be hard to proc your Torment Sigil. So instead, I use Bursting Sigil. So Bursting Sigil gives you just 5% more condition damage. You're only really doing condition damage, so it's like a 5% damage increase, which is nice. And also Sigil of Ice on your pistol dagger. So Sigil of Ice is really nice because, as I said before, you're going to have a lot of conditions on your target, and you want to cover those conditions by having as many unique conditions as possible. So adding Chill into the mix is just more of all those conditions. It overwhelms the target, not only because it's an extra condition they can't necessarily cleanse, but also Chill in general is just a really strong and oppressive condition, right? It slows the target for 66% of their movement speed, and it also increases their cooldowns. So it allows you to not only catch up to the target, because this build is kind of lacking in mobility, right? It's not like a melee thief build where you have a lot of like Heartseeker or Infiltrator Strike to catch up to the target. You kind of have issues with catching up to targets when they close the gap or they increase the gap between you and them. So Sigil of Ice actually helps you to close the gap, and it actually lasts for 3 seconds-ish because it's 2 seconds duration, but you have Condi duration from Trailblazers. So it's pretty long duration of chill for a class that doesn't really get chill, right? So it's really important. And on my short bow, I have energy cleansing. That's pretty standard for short bow on thief. You don't really want to go for an aggressive set. Like sometimes people go for like Geodoom on their bow, because 90% of the time, if you want damage, you're just not going to swap to short bow anyways. If you swap to your short bow, you're pretty much using it to kite. And in the situation where you want to kite, cleansing and energy are just really good, right? And you're also using Antitoxin Rune. So Antitoxin Rune gives you condition damage as the main stat. There's a little bit of incoming condition duration reduction, but that's not too important. What's really important is the 6th set, which is incoming condition cleanses remove an additional condition. So this scales very well with very low amounts of conditions that proc often, because it only gives you an extra cleanse every time you cleanse a condition, right? So for example, withdraw. This cleanses all movement inhibiting conditions, and then because of Trickster, it will remove another condition. And if it removes any conditions, it'll remove another one. So say you have chill, blind, and burning on you. It'll remove the chill from withdrawal, it'll remove the blind or the burn with the extra Trickster one, and then it'll remove the other one with the Antitoxin proc. And then if you had like a 4th condition on you that wasn't a movement inhibiting condition, it would basically stick to you. But if you had 5 conditions on you, say for example you have chill, cripple on you, and then blind, burn, bleeding, it would remove chill and cripple, because that's what withdrawal does. Then it would remove blind and burning, for example, because the Antitoxin proc and the Trickster proc, but then it wouldn't remove the final condition because it's not counting each condition you remove, it's just adding one on. So it's still quite a lot. So every time you use withdraw, though, however, you will also gain stealth. So it would not only remove like 3 to 4 to 5 conditions with withdraw, you would also go into stealth, which would remove one of the damaging conditions, and then if you have a condition removed from Shadow's Embrace, you'd have another condition removed, right? Because that's a unique cleanse. So you're removing like 3 to 5 with withdrawal, and then up to 2 with Shadow's Embrace. So your heal skill will almost always be a full condition cleanse, which is really strong. So yeah, that's really important. Also, your Cloak and Dagger will give you condition cleanse from Shadow's Embrace, right? So it'll cleanse one of the damaging conditions, and then it'll cleanse another one because of the Antitoxin proc. And also, you have your cleansing sigil on your bow. So cleansing sigil is, whenever you swap, it'll give you 3 condition cleanse. So it'll actually cleanse 4 conditions now. So that's really good. Also, you have roll for initiative, which is basically the same thing as withdrawal. It'll remove, well, actually, withdrawal can remove torment. Forgot to mention that. It removes torment as well as the movement inhibiting conditions. But roll for initiative just removes inhibiting conditions, and then it'll add one on top from Trickster, and then it can do another from Antitoxin. So yeah, both these skills are like heavy condi clears. Dagger Storm also would remove 2 condis. So yeah, a lot of condi cleanse on this build. If you go versus another condi thief and they're running like the permastealth version and you're running this version, you actually have an advantage because you have way more condi cleanse than them. So it's really good, and yeah, I like it. I like the mobility that you're provided from the Trickster's traits. You have like pretty much enough condi cleanse to just ignore condis. You still have to play around them a little bit, but yeah, it's really good. The one condition that you really have trouble with, though, is blind, because the only way you really remove blind is through actually hitting something. You can't like go and like on a normal like melee thief build, say like Dagger, your Dagger auto removes blind like really quickly. Whereas with this build, all your attacks are kind of slowish or cost a lot of initiative to use. So it's kind of costly to remove blind, but generally I would remove it with Dancing Dagger. So yeah, that's pretty much the runes and the sigils. The food that I take is the Orion truffle and meat stew. So basically you just get 40% more endurance regeneration, which is a little bit less than vigor. So it feels like you do have vigor, even though you're not taking the Bountiful Theft trait, which would give you vigor. So you're not getting that, which means you'll get a little bit more dodges still, even though you're getting Trickster value. So that's really important to surviving, because even though you're Trailblazer, you still need to evade to survive on a thief. And I'll just use the Tuning Icicles as well, because that just gives you more condition damage. So the skills that you'll be using, the Pistol Dagger set is your main damage set. Your auto attack is pretty okay. It's just very consistent damage, because the pistol shot, it can't really be sidestepped. It kind of like homes in on the target, so it's very easy to land, but it doesn't really do that much damage. If you've got nothing better to do, yeah, use it. Boulder Shot isn't really that good because it's a 4 initiative cast, gives Vallun and 2 seconds of Immobilize, which is good. 2 seconds of Immob is good, but it essentially does nothing because you're not really getting damage from Panic Strike, because that's not even really worth it anyways, and you're losing 4 initiative just to stall for time, really. You could do a lot of other things with your initiative, but yeah, if you've got nothing better to do and you just want to keep people away from you, then yeah, use Bola Shot. Now, here's where you really want to be using your initiative. Shadow Strike. This is your dual wield attack, so it will give poison from the Deadly Ambition trait whenever you land it, or its second hit, which is Repeater. But basically how Shadow Strike works is you have to be in melee range. It does a very quick attack like this. It basically has no animation, and if you hit something with it, you'll give that target Torment, and then you'll port back and do like a power attack, which doesn't really do that much damage because you have no power. But you basically want to get the Torment on the target, and you want to enable the Repeater attack, which is available if it lands, and that'll allow you to do 2 attacks before the timer runs out, and then you have to use Shadow Strike again. And the Repeater bleeds are actually pretty decent, and even though it's kind of a slow attack, it gives you a little bit extra pressure after you land your Steel Burst. So I like Shadow Strike a lot because it sort of keeps you safe while also dealing damage at the same time. Now alternatively, you have Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger serves sort of the same purpose as Shadow Strike. Both of them deal damage. Cloak and Dagger doesn't really do that much damage itself, but it enables your stealth attack, which is sneak attack, and that'll do a lot of bleeding too. So in a way, Shadow Strike enables Repeater and Cloak and Dagger enables your sneak attack. But Cloak and Dagger is a lot harder to land because it's not an instant cast, so it has a pretty decent cast time to it, which is very easy to counterplay. And also the sneak attack that follows Cloak and Dagger is a little bit more predictable to counterplay, because as soon as you go in stealth, they can just dodge as soon as they see the sneak attack animation, which is this. And if they get hit by the first hit, then they can dodge the 4 after it, right? So Cloak and Dagger is very good though in a lot of situations, because the stealth allows you to delay a little bit more against ranged classes that'll just free cast on you. So the distance from Shadow Strike isn't really that much better in those situations. And versus melee classes, yeah, Shadow Strike is maybe better. So Cloak and Dagger versus ranged maybe, and Shadow Strike versus melee. It's not that hard cut, but Cloak and Dagger can give you a lot of value though, because the sneak attack, of course, procs Rending Shade, gives you might, and it gives you the Shadow Siphoning. So technically, Cloak and Dagger would give you a little bit more value, but obviously it's harder to land. So if you do think you can land a Cloak and Dagger, what you can do is that into the sneak attack, and then you can do your Shadow Strike. And obviously that was no valid path, but yeah, you'd port away, and then you would get both of them in. Whereas if you just use Shadow Strike and you port away, obviously that's a really bad spot for showing this, but if you just use Shadow Strike to port in, then it's kind of harder to land a Cloak and Dagger after it. So your biggest combo burst would be a Cloak and Dagger into sneak attack into repeater. But obviously there's no CC tied to that combo unless you get the fear from Rending Shade, but they have to have no boons. So yeah, you have to decide when you want Shadow Strike and when you want Cloak and Dagger. You do have to be careful that you don't waste these abilities and just lose all of your initiative trying to land them. So you have to be very kind of like deliberate, but also very careful, because if I go in and they have block up, well then I need to like break that with an auto attack first and then Cloak and Dagger. Or if they dodge the Cloak and Dagger animation, I need to stow my Cloak and Dagger so that it doesn't waste initiative there. So you can actually stow Cloak and Dagger pretty far into the animation, so that's good. And you also have to be careful with Shadow Strike, because it's such a fast attack, you could just deplete all of your initiative instantly, almost. So you want to get used to, on Thief, not spamming your abilities, because there is skill queuing and you have no cooldowns on Thief. So if you're not landing any of your skills, it's giving you the opportunity to use it again, but if it's not a good time to use it, then you'll just be wasting your initiative. So yeah, you got to be careful with that. Be very precise with your skill usage. And you also have Dancing Dagger, which is kind of nice for just adding cover condi, because it's a cripple. You don't really get that anywhere else. You do have Chill already, so the movement speed reduction is kind of good when your Ice Sigil is on cooldown to help you to get onto your target. And that's pretty much it. You just use Cloak and Dagger or Shadow Strike to do bursts, and then you fill in the gap with Dancing Dagger and Vital Shot. And you also just use your stealth, your stolen abilities, and all of your utilities to kind of fill in the gap between that. So another thing is you have Steal, right? So Steal is a port to the target. It gives you a bunch of boons, a bunch of conditions on your target in initiative, and it'll give you 2 stolen abilities. If you steal to an NPC, you can sometimes get really strong stolen abilities like this one, and with Improv you can get it twice. So as you can see here, 6 bleeding for 14 seconds, and I can use it twice. That's 12 bleeding. In World versus World, you oftentimes will steal to neutral mobs, and you can get really strong abilities like 2-second stun or something like that. So knowing when to use your burst is really important with your steal, because that's when a lot of your condis come out. So combining your 3 with your steal allows you to get this big condi burst with just 2 button presses, and then you'd spam your repeater. Or you can do steal with Cloak and Dagger, obviously, but that's a little bit more counterplayable. So another thing is, when you use your steal to get your burst, you usually can follow it up with another burst, or if you know that the enemy is like, they're not able to be killed, you have 25 seconds in between steal uses. So you can go into your short bow and use the short bow as like a kiting weapon to fill in the gap between your burst combos with steal and the pistol dagger set. So your auto attack is pretty relevant. It does like no damage, but cluster bomb is really good, because when you detonate it, so you shoot out this arcing arrow and then you click it again, it does a detonate, and that can do up to 4 bleeds for 5 seconds, and that's really good if you're very good aiming that. You can get the detonate right on the target and get 4 bleeds, and that'll do a decent amount of damage, but that's really kind of your only damage in the short bow. You also have choking gas, but that's not really that much damage because it's a 2-second poison each tick, and yeah, it just runs out very quickly, and they're not going to stand in it the whole duration usually. You only really use the choking gas with your Dagger Storm or to interrupt certain abilities, but it's very difficult to interrupt with a slow-moving projectile like choking gas. So it does also cost 6 initiative in World versus World, so it's kind of costly. So you got to be careful with that. Disabling Shot is a little bit of a cripple, and it'll do an evade. So the evade is okay. It's a very short evade, but it doesn't really give you so much of an evade as it does the movement. So when you're in short bow, you're kind of like trying to kite, right? So you want to survive until your next burst. So what you do is you're kiting around, maybe you'll use cluster bombs, and then you see something come at you and you evade using about face or whatever, and you get yourself moving away from the target. That's really important. So you evade an attack and you move away from the target while evading. So that's really important. You also have Infiltrator's Arrow, which is only 1 more initiative, and that can port you to 900 range from a projectile shot. And it'll also blind at the location that you use the projectile, but that's really not that important. You really want the porting ability, and trying to port to an enemy is not really what you want to do. You want to port away from an enemy. So you can use this pretty much from any angle, so you don't need to be facing the way that you're going. So you can use this to juke very well. So like if I'm going in this direction and I shoot this way, I'm moving towards where I'm porting to. So I'm actually getting a shorter port, because in transit, right, I'm already covering that distance. What you want to do with the short bow is actually have your camera enabled, obviously, to free camera in these settings. Should be under camera options. Yeah, right here, free camera. And while you're in your short bow, you're looking around, looking for either people to pressure with your cluster bombs or places to port to that the enemy doesn't expect you to go to. And if they're chasing you like that and you go in this direction, not only are you getting a further port because you're moving away from your port, but you're also making it harder for them to chase you because you're changing direction. And being unpredictable is always less counterplay than being predictable. So yeah, the short bow is really nice, and also because it is a projectile, it allows you to do a lot of plays where, say, you're in a trap, like a Dragon Hunter trap, and you don't have any evades to dodge out, but you do have a lot of initiative. So what you can do is, say, or maybe like there's necro marks and you want to port into the marks, but you don't want to eat all the marks. So say there's necro marks here. What I can do is I can port to the location of the marks and then use Disabling Shot in the middle of that. You can also do it with just a normal evade, but you can evade before the port happens, and you'll be evading when you port into them, and you'll dodge all the marks. And yeah, that's really useful in some situations. You can also like stealth on the target like this. Say like there's a down body, say you get them down, and what you can do is you can like stealth stomp them, but like a stealth stomp isn't really safe versus guardians, right? So you do the stealth stomp and then you port away, and then you'd be stomping right now in the animation because you can precast the stomp before you port away, and then you can port back in with like Steel or Infiltrator Signet. So there's a lot of plays you can make with Infiltrator's Arrow. It's a really good skill. Gives you a lot of mobility when you're not going for damage, and just in general really good. So yeah, that's pretty much the weapons. We already talked about Withdraw a lot, so it's just a really good skill for giving you movement. As I said before, this is not a stealth kind of build, so your mobility is really what's important. So this is really good. It's an evade and it's a mega condi cleanse, so it's super safe of a skill to use, right? Because when you use it, you're basically going to peel for yourself, and it's a 20-second cooldown, which is low. So just surviving 20 seconds until you get your withdraw is not that hard to do. So next is Shadow Step. This is like the bread and butter of every Thief build. You use this or you don't play Thief, right? And basically what it does is it gives you a stun break on the first cast, and it leaves a little bit of a shadow return, which you can return to, and both of these animations, well, both of those spells have no animation. So you can combine them with a lot of skills and obviously use them to stomp people. And the return is actually a condi cleanse. So it'll cleanse 4 condis because of Antitoxin Rune. And both of them are stun breaks. So you have 2 stun breaks on one ability. And also, mind you, all of your other utilities are stun breaks, by the way. So you're very slippery on this build. And basically how you want to use Shadow Step is kind of like aggressively, ideally. Obviously, if you're taking a lot of pressure and you have to use Shadow Step, then you have to use it. But if the circumstances aren't too much pressure, then you want to use it aggressively to like land your skills. And then while you're being aggressive like that, you have the safety of 15 seconds to just port back at any time and cleanse conditions and sort of like just be completely safe. So you have that insurance while Shadow's return is ready. And this allows you to play very aggressively because you have that get out of jail card for 15 seconds. And also, you want to be using your skills very aggressively like that because you have improvisation, because it can always just come off cooldown randomly. So you have lots of kind of like all of your skills sort of can serve the same purpose, so you want to be just using them. And next you have Roll for Initiative. Roll for Initiative is a stun break evade that gives you 6 initiative. So in your pistol dagger set, you don't really need that much initiative, but when you're in short bow, you do need a lot of initiative because your short bow 5 is 6 initiative. So this will give you basically another Infiltrator's Arrow. And it also cleanses all of the movement inhibiting conditions, +1, and then plus another because of Antitoxin Runes and Trickster. So really good condi cleanse. It's sort of like a withdraw effect, right? You do withdraw and it's like the same thing to use Roll for Initiative. So next is Infiltrator Signet. This is a very important skill for this build because it serves as like a secondary steal. So how you use the build, right, is you use steal to do your burst, and then you have a lot of damage, but then if the enemy runs away from you, there's not really many ways for you to catch up, right? You don't want to just be spamming Dancing Dagger and Vital Shot to catch up. So Infiltrator Signet ports you to the target from 1200 range, and it breaks stun, and it's not like steal. So even though it has the same range as steal, and it has the same purpose as steal, the functionality is a little bit different. So you don't have to actually steal to the target. You can be further than 1200 range away, and you will still be able to use the skill. So right here, I'm not in 1200 range, but I can use it, and now I'm 1200 range closer to the target. So you can use that very strategically with the show all enemy names and basically the neutral mobs in World versus World. So you enable show all enemy names, and you can see from a distance what you can port to basically. And you can use this like if you're being chased from this direction, you can port away if there's mobs over here or something like that. And it's just really nice for giving you that escape potential along with steal. You can use steal or Infiltrator Signet. And you just use it as another way to enable your skills. So you get in there and you do your burst combos because they land. Finally, you have Dagger Storm. Dagger Storm is not really that much damage because it's bleeding, and the bleeding is like you'll usually get like 1 bleed or 2 bleed every second that you're in it. So I got 6 there because it was bouncing a lot, but you generally don't get that much. And obviously it can do a little bit of damage, but it's not really that reliable for damage. What you're really using Dagger Storm for is the evade frame and the reflect. So you evade for 3 seconds, even though you reflect for 4 seconds. So if you don't want to reflect, then you should pretty much stow the end of the Dagger Storm or dodge roll out of it, because you're not actually evading during that last second of the animation. And it's just basically useful for filling the gap in between your other skills, right? Like you're landing your bursts or whatever, and then the target gets away from you and you need to get closer to it, but you're also taking counter pressure before you can get to it, and you don't have Infiltrator Signet. Or you're kiting with short bow and you need like 3 more seconds till your withdrawal comes up. Just Dagger Storm to fill in the gap. And yeah, it reflects some things, so versus like rangers, you can knock them back with their own knockbacks, so it's pretty nice. And that's pretty much all the skills. It's also a trick, so you remove 2 conditions with it. So in a lot of cases you might even die due to conditions while you're evading like this. So it's nice that you do get some condi cleanse. And so how you'll use the build, right, is you'll want to abuse Cloak and Dagger on neutral mobs and like walls or stuff like that. So structures in World versus World, if they're not allied, are technically interactable with. So this barrel, this target barrel right here, is the same kind of functionality as like a wall or like some kind of door. Well, I guess doors you can still hit, right? So, but walls you can't hit, but you can still interact with them, and you can Cloak and Dagger them actually, and that'll give you stealth even though you're not hitting them really. And you can do that with supply depots as well, obviously neutral mobs, but because you're not actually hitting it, you can stack up a lot of stealth by just spamming Cloak on it. And you don't have to be too careful about revealing yourself. So an issue with using it on doors and on neutral mobs or on players is that you kind of have to time it so that you don't hit it right before your stealth ends. Because if I do that like here, and like I'm right about to end and then I reveal myself, then you're revealed for a long time before you can use it again and get into stealth, and that can be between life and death if you're in a situation where you need it. Like say if you're in you're Zerg surfing and you want to get the stealth and you accidentally reveal yourself, well then you got a Zerg on you and you're revealed for 4 seconds. So yeah, you got to be careful with that. But basically you want to stealth to travel around very safely on like walls and stuff until you find your target. Once you find the target, you want to be very aggressive, use your 1 skill and your 3 skill while in stealth, and then Cloak and Dagger for another 1 skill and then another 3 skill, and use your steel to combo in. And then you want to kind of like reset with your heal skill and then use the sneak attack before you come out of stealth. You can use your stolen abilities to fill the gap, or use short bow to kite around. And just basically you think of it as your win condition is landing your burst. So when you land your burst, you're going in for a kill. If you know you can't kill it, you still want to like bait out cooldowns. So if you bait out cooldowns, then you want to keep pressuring normally, but the enemy's not going to just let you do that for free. So you can try to pressure still while in short bow, but yeah, you want to be like filling the gap in between your first steal and your second steal with all of your utilities. You can go into stealth with Cloak and Dagger, or just use the short bow to kite. And then once your steal comes up again, you want to go in for another kill attempt basically, and you want to do your steal into 3, or Cloak and Dagger into your sneak attack, and then spamming repeater and stuff like that. And that gets you most of your damage right there. So the damage of the build is very simple, right? It's just you spam steal and 3 or 5 and 1. And yeah, the damaging part of this build is very easy. What's hard is getting to that point, right? So you have to fill the gap using your positioning, your kiting, and good like ports to survive long enough between your heavy damage burst combos. And that's pretty much how it works.